I was 32 years old when I heard those cutting words at my father's retirement party. My stepmother Judith never made a secret of her disdain for me, but that night she took it to another level. You know that feeling when someone insults you and the entire room goes quiet? That happened at the Oak Ridge Country Club when she said I was a disappointment loudly enough for everyone to hear. What Judith didn't know was that after 15 years of separation, I'd reconnected with my birth mother, Catherine. The truth was about to hit harder than Judith could ever imagine. Where are you watching this from? If you're settled in for this family drama, hit subscribe now, and let's get into how I finally stood up to the woman who tried to erase me. Growing up, I remember a childhood that started with warmth and slowly froze over. Before my parents divorced when I was 10, we were a typical American family weekend picnics at Westlake Park, holiday traditions and bedtime stories from my dad, Richard. He worked as an engineer at Hartman Industries, often bringing home small gadgets he'd designed that fascinated my young mind. Everything changed when I was 12, and Dad introduced me to Judith. She was tall, immaculately dressed with a smile that never reached her eyes when she looked at me. From our first meeting at Riverside Cafe, I sensed her coldness. She spoke to my father as if I wasn't there, placing her hand possessively on his arm. "Richard, we should plan that Aspen trip for December," she'd say while I sat quietly stirring my milkshake. After they married 6 months later, Judith began her campaign to minimize my relationship with Dad. She scheduled couples trips during my weekend visits. She redecorated our house, removing family photos that included my mother, Catherine. My bedroom was converted into a home office, within a year relegating me to a smaller guest room that never felt like mine. "Delia, your father and I need to discuss adult matters," became her standard dismissal whenever I wanted time with Dad. Dad gradually withdrew from being the engaged parent I knew. Our fishing trips stopped. He missed my school events. When I made the honor roll in ninth grade, he promised to attend the ceremony, but called last minute saying Judith wasn't feeling well and they couldn't make it. The mystery that haunted me through those years was why my mother, Catherine, had left town so suddenly after the divorce. The story Dad and Judith told was that she'd wanted a fresh start with no responsibilities. "She chose freedom over family," Judith would say with practiced sympathy. Each time she said it, something felt wrong, but I was too young to question the narrative. My teenage years were filled with Judith's subtle criticism. She would examine my outfit before school and suggest I change into something more appropriate. She would compare my B+ grades to her niece's straight A's. When I gained the normal weight of adolescence, she started leaving diet magazines on my bed. Dad witnessed it all, but said nothing. At dinner, he'd stare at his plate, while Judith suggested I needed to work on my posture, my grades, my attitude, my future. His silence felt like agreement. When I was accepted to Northwestern University, Judith hosted a dinner party for family friends that felt more like her celebration than mine. "Richard and I always emphasized education," she told guests, though she'd never once helped with my homework or applications. College brought freedom. I limited visits home to major holidays, each one characterized by tension with Judith, and awkward conversations with the stranger my father had become. I built a successful career in digital marketing at Summit Media in Chicago, creating a life that required minimal contact with the family I was supposedly a disappointment to. Each Christmas and Thanksgiving followed the same script. I'd arrive full of hope that things would be different. Judith would spend the visit making subtle digs at my career appearance or single status, and Dad would retreat into his newspaper or yard work. I learned to schedule short visits, always staying at a hotel, rather than their house, protecting myself from the full force of Judith's disapproval. By the time the invitation to Dad's retirement party arrived, we had settled into a familiar pattern of distance, punctuated by obligatory contact. I was, for all intents and purposes, a guest star in my father's life, appearing just often enough to maintain the illusion of family. The embossed invitation to Dad's retirement party arrived on a Tuesday. 35 years of service to Hartman Industries, it proclaimed in elegant gold lettering. The celebration would take place at the Oak Ridge Country Club, an establishment so exclusive that Judith had mentioned its membership waiting list at every opportunity during my youth. I traced my finger over my father's name, Richard Allen Morgan, Chief Structural Engineer, and felt the familiar mixture of pride and sadness that characterized our relationship. Despite everything I was proud of him, despite everything I wished he had been proud of me too. My first instinct was to send a gift, and my regrets. Chicago to Cedar Rapids wasn't a short trip, and the thought of enduring Judith's hospitality made my stomach tighten. But something stopped me from drafting that email. Maybe it was the photo I'd recently found in my childhood keepsake box, Dad teaching me to ride a bike, his face alight with genuine joy. Maybe it was the conversation I'd had with Catherine, who reminded me that showing up sometimes matters more than being comfortable. Whatever the reason, I called my boss Sarah and requested time off. Family event? I said vaguely. She raised an eyebrow, but approved it without questions. My colleagues at Summit Media knew very little about my family situation by design. The weeks before the party were filled with anxiety-fueled preparation. I spent an entire Saturday at Michigan Avenue boutiques, searching for the perfect outfit, something that conveyed success and confidence, without appearing to try too hard. I finally settled on a navy blue dress that was conservative enough for the country club, but fitted enough to show that at 32, I had grown into myself, despite Judith's predictions of failure. I booked a room at the Cedar Hotel downtown, rather than stay at the family home. When Dad called to half-heartedly insist I stay with them, the relief in his voice when I declined was palpable. Some boundaries, once established, benefit everyone. The flight from O'Hare to Eastern Iowa Airport gave me time to rehearse various scenarios. I imagined warm conversations with Dad's colleagues, many of whom had known me as a child. I practiced neutral responses to Judith's inevitable comments about my appearance or marital status. Most painfully, I rehearsed what I might say during a toast, searching for words that honored my father's career, without fabricating a closeness we no longer shared. Landing in Cedar Rapids brought a flood of memories. This was the landscape of my childhood. The rolling hills, the familiar buildings downtown, even the particular quality of Midwestern sunlight in early summer. I picked up my rental car and drove past landmarks that had once defined my world, Westlake Elementary, where I had been spelling bee champion Riverside Park, where Dad had taught me to cast a fishing line, the old library, where I spent countless Saturday afternoons escaping into books. The morning of the retirement party, I woke early and went through my preparation rituals. Hair styled in soft waves makeup, applied with precision jewelry, minimal but expensive choices, designed to armor me against criticism. I arrived at Oak Ridge Country Club an hour before the event was scheduled to begin, hoping for a few moments with Dad before the crowd arrived. The venue was elegant, a renovated mansion with gleaming wood paneling and views of the immaculately maintained golf course. Judith was already there, directing staff about table arrangements and floral displays. She wore a silver dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent, and was surrounded by a small court of similarly dressed women, her friends from the club, I presumed. She spotted me immediately, her smile tightening almost imperceptibly. "Delia, you made it. How nice." Her tone suggested it was anything but nice. "Richard is in the library with some board members." No hug. No "how was your flight?" No "thank you for coming all this way." I nodded and moved past her, finding my father in a wood-paneled room surrounded by 4 older men. They were laughing about something, tumblers of amber liquid in their hands. Dad looked older than I had expected, his hair completely gray, now lines carved deeper around his eyes. When he saw me, there was a moment of genuine pleasure on his face, before he smoothed it into something more reserved. "Delia," he said, standing to give me a brief, awkward hug. "Gentlemen, this is my daughter. She works in advertising in Chicago." "Digital marketing," I corrected automatically. The board members were warm, shaking my hand and asking questions about my work and life in Chicago. One of them, William, mentioned, remembering me as a little girl visiting the office. "You were always drawing blueprints like your dad," he recalled. "We thought we'd have another engineer in the family." Dad shifted uncomfortably. Delia found her own path. As guests began to arrive, I helped arrange name cards and welcomed Dad's colleagues. Many remembered me commenting on how I'd grown up asking about my career with genuine interest. These interactions felt healing reminders that there had been a time when I was simply Richard's daughter, not an inconvenience to be managed by Judith. Throughout the evening, I noticed Dad seemed distracted. He moved between conversations mechanically, his smile not reaching his eyes. During a brief moment alone together by the bar, I asked if everything was okay. "Just thinking about what's next," he said vaguely. 35 years is a long time to do one thing. I wanted to ask more about his plans, his feelings, the distance between us, but Judith appeared at his elbow. Richard, the Hendersons just arrived. You should greet them personally. She glanced at me. Delia, perhaps you could check that the presentation equipment is working. The tech person seems confused. It was a dismissal, thinly disguised as a request. As I walked away, I heard her murmur something to my father that made him sigh heavily. Some patterns never change. I thought heading toward the small stage where a projection screen had been set up for speeches. What I didn't know then was how dramatically some patterns can break, given enough pressure and the right moment. Dinner was served at precisely 7:30, with the efficiency that comes from a venue accustomed to hosting important events. I found myself seated at table 9, far from the family table, where Dad, Judith, her sister Barbara, and several board members were engaged in animated conversation. My table mates were mostly younger employees who seemed uncertain why the daughter of the guest of honor wasn't seated with her father. Politics, I explained with a practiced smile when one of them awkwardly mentioned it. Let them think it was corporate politics rather than family dysfunction. The food was excellent salmon for most guests, chicken for those who had specified preferences, all served on gleaming white plates with artistic drizzles of sauce. I ate mechanically, watching the head table where Judith was clearly holding court, touching my father's arm periodically in a gesture that seemed designed to establish ownership rather than affection. After the main course, the formal program began. Hartman Industries CEO Martin Blackwell took the stage first, highlighting Dad's contributions to the company, the patents he'd secured, the major projects he'd overseen, the mentorship he'd provided to younger engineers. Photos appeared on the screen behind him. Dad at construction sites, Dad receiving awards, Dad in the office surrounded by smiling colleagues. It was like watching a documentary about a stranger who resembled my father. The Richard Morgan being celebrated was accomplished, respected, integral to the company's success. The Richard Morgan I knew was a shadow who had allowed his daughter to be pushed to the margins of his life. Several colleagues followed with briefer speeches sharing anecdotes about Dad's precision, his unexpected sense of humor, his reliability. When William mentioned that Richard always put family first, I nearly choked on my water. The audacity of that statement in a room where his daughter sat at a distant table, while his wife orchestrated his celebration, was breathtaking. As the program continued, I found myself gripping my small evening purse inside, which was the speech I'd prepared. I'd planned to speak briefly to share a daughter's perspective on this milestone in my father's life. Despite everything, I wanted to honor the man who had once taught me to ride a bike and calculate the trajectory of homemade rockets. When Martin asked if anyone else would like to say a few words, I stood. I saw Judith's head swivel in my direction, her expression shifting from surprise to calculation. I made my way to the stage, smoothing my dress, feeling the eyes of over 100 people following my progress. The spotlight was warm as I unfolded my paper. For those who don't know me, I'm Delia Morgan Richards' daughter. I began, my voice steadier than I felt. Growing up with an engineer for a father meant Delia speaks for herself, not the family. Judith's voice cut through the room. She had risen from her seat, glass in hand. Before she continues, Richard and I would like to thank everyone for coming tonight. As his partner for the past 20 years, I can say that. She continued smoothly, effectively hijacking my moment. I stood frozen at the microphone, paper in hand, as she delivered what should have been my tribute. Dad watched her, his expression unreadable. Not once did he look at me. When Judith finished to polite applause, Martin looked uncertainly between us. Delia, did you still want to? I think Judith covered it, I said quietly, folding my speech and returning to my table. The humiliation burned through me. I excused myself and headed for the restroom, needing a moment alone to compose myself. The ladies' room was empty except for me, a small mercy. I stood at the sink staring at my reflection, trying to recognize the confident marketing executive I was in Chicago, in this woman whose cheeks were flushed with embarrassment. As I was about to leave, I heard voices just outside the door. Judith and two women, probably the friends I'd seen her with earlier. Can't believe she actually tried to give a speech, Judith was saying, as if she has any right to speak about Richard's career when she barely keeps in touch. She seems successful, though, one of the friends offered. Didn't you say she works for some big company in Chicago? Please, Judith scoffed, playing on computers all day. Richard put her through college hoping she'd do something meaningful, and this is how she repays him. Just another disappointment. I pushed open the door at that moment, coming face to face with the three women. Judith's friends had the grace to look embarrassed, but Judith herself simply raised an eyebrow. "You should be careful what you say in public restrooms," I said, my voice low. "You never know who's listening." As I walked past them, Judith spoke again, louder this time, clearly intending to be heard by nearby guests who were mingling in the hallway. "Just like her mother," she said, "always making everything about herself. Such a disappointment." The conversations around us stuttered to a halt. Several of Dad's colleagues turned to stare. I felt the weight of their gaze, pity, discomfort, curiosity. As I stood there, Judith's words hanging in the air between us, I looked for my father, finding him at the edge of the group. Our eyes met. For a moment, just a moment, I thought he might say something, might defend me, or at least diffuse the situation. Instead, he looked away, taking a deliberate sip of his drink. My hands began to shake. My heart raced so fast I could feel my pulse in my throat. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to get in my rental car and drive straight to the airport, to put as much distance between myself and this toxic family as possible. But something else stirred beneath the hurt, a calm, steady voice that sounded remarkably like Catherine. A voice that said, "You deserve better than this." A voice that reminded me I was no longer a helpless child. I took out my phone and sent a text message, 3 words that would change everything. "It's time. Now." 6 months before my father's retirement party, I was working late at Summit Media, finishing a presentation for a major client. My phone buzzed with a notification from a rarely used social media account, a message request from someone named Catherine Morgan, my mother's name. I stared at the screen for a full minute before opening it. The profile picture was blurry, showing only the edge of a woman's face and shoulder. The message was brief. "Delia, I know it's been many years. I understand if you want nothing to do with me. But if you're willing, I have truths you deserve to hear." My first reaction was anger. 15 years of silence, and now she wanted to talk. I closed the app without responding, but the message haunted me throughout the night. By morning, curiosity had edged out anger enough for me to write back a single line. "Why now?" Her response came immediately, as if she'd been waiting by her phone. "Because I finally found you, and because I think you're old enough now to understand what really happened." What followed was a slow, careful reconstruction of the past through messages, then emails, then phone calls. Catherine's story emerged in fragments, each more disturbing than the last. She had never wanted to leave Cedar Rapids or abandon me. After the divorce, she'd fought for joint custody, initially succeeding. But then things began to happen. Documents she never signed appeared in court filings. Her apartment was broken into repeatedly. Her employer received anonymous complaints about her work ethic. "At first I thought it was bad luck," she explained during our first phone call, her voice stronger than I remembered. "Then I found evidence that someone had accessed my email accounts, my bank records. I started to realize this was orchestrated." The orchestration, she explained, came from Judith, who had begun dating my father while the divorce was still being finalized. Using her connections in the legal community and her substantial family money, Judith had methodically destroyed Catherine's credibility and stability. "The final straw was when I found photographs of you in my mailbox," Catherine told me. "School pictures I hadn't taken with notes about your daily schedule. It was a threat, Delia. They were letting me know they could reach you anytime." Terrified for my safety, Catherine had made the devastating choice to leave town, completely believing that her absence would at least remove any perceived threat to me. She had moved first to Seattle, then Toronto, changing her name and rebuilding her life. "I tried to contact you when you turned 18, she said. "Letters, emails to what I thought was your address. Nothing ever got through." I remembered my freshman year of college, when the university email system had been accidentally configured to forward all my messages to my home address, an arrangement Judith had suggested to help keep you organized, Delia. As Catherine and I cautiously rebuilt our relationship over phone calls and video chats, she showed me evidence she had preserved, altered documents with forged signatures, threatening notes, bank statements showing unexplained withdrawals that had pushed her toward financial ruin just after the divorce. Our first in-person meeting happened 3 months after her initial message at a quiet cafe in Milwaukee neutral territory halfway between my life in Chicago and her new home in Minneapolis. I arrived early, heart-pounding, scanning every woman who entered. And then suddenly she was there, and I knew her immediately. We had the same eyes, the same way of tucking hair behind our ears when nervous. She was older, but still beautiful, dressed simply in jeans and a blue sweater that matched our eyes. "Delia," she said, voice breaking. I had planned to be reserved to ask hard questions before allowing any emotional connection. Instead, I found myself standing, moving toward her, allowing the hug that bridged 15 years of absence. Over steaming mugs of coffee, we talked for hours. She had rebuilt her life becoming an art therapist working with traumatized children. She had never remarried or had other children. "I couldn't," she said simply. "Not after losing you." She showed me photographs she had kept me as a baby, a toddler, a young girl. She had documented every memory up until our separation, preserving the evidence of our bond, even when she believed I might never want to see her again. "Why didn't you fight harder?" I asked the question that had lingered since childhood. She spread her hands, palms up, in a gesture of painful surrender. "I did fight, Delia, until the day Judith's brother, a police officer, told me explicitly that if I didn't leave town, they would find a reason to have me arrested. With their connections, they could have made it stick." She met my eyes directly. "I had to choose between being in your life while destroyed and possibly imprisoned, or leaving you physically, but remaining whole enough to find you again someday." Over the next 3 months, we carefully constructed a new relationship. Catherine never pushed for more than I was ready to give. We discovered shared interests in photography and hiking. We laughed at the same obscure jokes. We both hated cilantro and loved thunderstorms. She advised me wisely about handling my relationship with Richard and Judith. "Anger will eat you alive," she said, "but boundaries will save you. You can acknowledge what happened without letting it define your future." It was Catherine who suggested we keep our reconnection private until the right moment. "Some truths need the right context," she said. "Otherwise, they just become ammunition in someone else's war." When the invitation to Dad's retirement party arrived, Catherine and I discussed whether this might be that moment. We decided to wait and see. I would attend alone, assess the situation, and determine if the truth would serve any purpose beyond revenge. "Healing doesn't require their acknowledgement," she reminded me. "But sometimes the truth demands to be spoken for the sake of everyone involved." Little did I know how prophetic those words would prove to be. After Judith's public disappointment comment at the retirement party, I moved to a quiet corner of the venue, phone pressed to my ear. "It's worse than we thought," I told Catherine. "She just humiliated me in front of everyone. Dad did nothing." Catherine's voice was calm, but resolved. "I'm already in town, staying at your hotel. Give me 20 minutes. My heart raced as I returned to the main room. The party had resumed its rhythm, though I noticed several people glancing my way with sympathy. Judith was holding court near the dessert table, laughing too loudly with her friends. Dad was engaged in conversation with Martin and some board members, his posture stiff. Exactly 18 minutes later, a ripple of murmurs spread through the room. Heads turned toward the entrance. Conversations faltered, and a glass shattered somewhere to my right. Catherine Morgan stood in the doorway. Time had been kind to her. At 56, she carried herself with quiet confidence, her dark hair now streaked with elegant silver, wearing a simple black dress that somehow made Judith's expensive outfit look overdone. Most importantly, she looked like me. Anyone who saw us together would immediately recognize the relationship. A woman near me whispered, "Isn't that Richard's first wife?" The room grew quieter as Catherine walked in, nodding politely to those who recognized her. Many of Dad's older colleagues had known her, had attended our family barbecues and holiday parties before the divorce. Several reached out to shake her hand, genuine pleasure on their faces. Dad saw her next. The color drained from his face so rapidly I worried he might faint. He gripped the back of a chair, knuckles white. Judith was the last to notice, turning only when the unusual silence registered. Her expression shifted from confusion to shock to fury in the span of seconds. "What is she doing here?" she hissed to no one in particular, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "This is a private event." I moved to stand beside Catherine, the symbolism of our united front lost on no one. "She's here as my guest," I said, my voice carrying in the hushed room. Judith stalked toward us, her heels clicking aggressively on the polished floor. "You need to leave immediately," she said to Catherine. "You have no right to be here." Catherine smiled slightly. "Hello, Judith. It's been a long time." "Richard," Judith called sharply. "Did you know about this?" All eyes turned to my father, who looked caught between worlds. He moved toward us slowly, as if walking underwater. "Catherine," he said, his voice barely audible. "I didn't expect—" No one did. I interrupted, finding a strength I'd never known I possessed, just like no one expected to hear my stepmother call me a disappointment tonight. But here we are, dealing with unexpected truths. The silence in the room was complete now. Even the servers had paused, trays of dessert forgotten in their hands. "I think it's time we had an honest conversation," I continued, "about forged custody documents, about threatening notes left in a mother's mailbox, about orchestrated job sabotage and manipulated court records." I pulled a folder from my purse, copies of the evidence Catherine had preserved, "about the systematic destruction of a mother's life to remove her from her daughter's world." Judith's face contorted. "These are ridiculous accusations. Richard, are you going to allow this scene at your retirement party?" Dad looked at the folder in my hand, then at Catherine's face, then at me. Something shifted in his expression. Recognition, perhaps, or the first inkling of accountability. "What documents?" he asked quietly. I handed him the first page, a custody agreement with Catherine's forged signature dated 20 years earlier. "This is just the beginning. There are dozens more." Judith attempted to snatch the paper, but Dad held it away from her, scanning it with the careful eye of an engineer accustomed to reviewing technical documents. "This isn't Catherine's signature," he said slowly. "I've seen enough of her handwriting to know." "Of course it is," Judith snapped. "Your ex-wife is manipulating Delia just like she always tried to manipulate you. This is exactly why she had to go." Had to go. The phrase hung in the air, damning in its implication. Catherine spoke for the first time since the confrontation began. "I never wanted to leave my daughter, Richard. I was given a choice between leaving town or facing fabricated criminal charges courtesy of Judith's brother in the police department and her friends in the prosecutor's office." Several of Dad's colleagues murmured in shock. William stepped forward. "Richard, is this true?" Dad looked genuinely confused. "I didn't know anything about threats. Judith told me Catherine wanted a clean break, that she was moving to take a job opportunity." "And you believed that a mother would abandon her child for a job?" I asked, unable to keep the hurt from my voice. "You never questioned it, never wondered why all her letters and calls suddenly stopped, never thought to ask why she gave up without a fight. When I know you saw how much she loved me." Dad looked stricken. "I thought—" "You thought what was convenient," Catherine said gently. "What allowed you to build your new life without complications." Judith's composure cracked completely. "This is absurd. You were an unfit mother. You were unstable." "Interesting," said a woman I recognized as Judge Winters, now retired, but once prominent in the family court. "I don't recall any evidence of instability in the Morgan custody case. In fact, I remember being surprised when Ms. Morgan suddenly withdrew her petition and left town." Judith turned to my father, grabbing his arm. "Richard, don't listen to them. They've clearly concocted this story to ruin your special night. This is just like Catherine always making everything about her." I stepped closer to Judith, close enough to see the fear behind her anger. "It's not about her. It's about what you stole from me. My mother, my relationship with my father, my sense of self-worth. Also, you could have the life you wanted without the inconvenience of your husband's child or his past." "I raised you," Judith sputtered. "I put up with your teenage attitude, your ingratitude." "You tolerated me," I corrected, "and made sure I knew it every day. The saddest part is you could have had my loyalty and even my love if you'd simply been kind. Instead, You worked so hard to eliminate any competition that you created exactly what you feared, a stepdaughter who would one day stand up and speak the truth. Dad finally found his voice again. Delia, Catherine, I need to understand what happened. If what you're saying is true, it's all documented, Catherine said. Every threat, every forged paper, every suspicious incident. I kept everything hoping someday Delia would be old enough to hear the truth. Judith made one last desperate attempt. Richard, are you really going to believe this woman over your wife of 20 years after everything we've built? Dad looked around the room at his colleagues watching in stunned silence, at Catherine, standing tall and dignified at me, finally speaking my truth, and something seemed to crumble inside him. I believe them, he said quietly. God help me, but it all makes sense now. The inconsistencies I ignored, the questions I was afraid to ask. He turned to Judith. What have you done? The impact of those 4 words was immediate. Judith's social mask collapsed completely. I did what I had to do, she hissed. She would have poisoned Delia against me, against us. I protected our marriage by destroying a child's relationship with her mother. William's voice cut through the room. Other voices joined in, colleagues and friends expressing shock and disapproval. I raised my hand, silencing the growing commotion. I didn't come here tonight to destroy anyone. I came to honor my father's career, and I stayed to reclaim my truth. I looked directly at Judith. I am not a disappointment. I never was. The only disappointment here is what you chose to do to a child and her mother. I turned to my father. And you. You chose the easier path every time. You chose to believe the convenient story. You chose to look away when Judith pushed me to the margins of your life. You chose comfort over truth over and over again. Richard Morgan, respected engineer and man of precision, had no response. Delia and I are leaving now, Catherine said. Anyone who wants to hear the full truth is welcome to contact us. The rest is up to you, Richard. As we walked toward the door side by side, I heard my father call my name. I paused but didn't turn. I'm sorry, he said, his voice breaking. I know, I replied. But sorry isn't enough. Not anymore. Catherine and I left the country club with our heads high, the weight of secrets finally lifted from our shoulders. Behind us, we left a room full of witnesses to a truth that could no longer be buried, and a father and stepmother whose carefully constructed reality had finally crumbled under the weight of their own choices. Catherine and I retreated to Rose's all-night diner, a throwback establishment with vinyl booths and coffee strong enough to dissolve spoons. It had been one of our special places when I was small. Occasionally, Shed pick me up from school, and we'd share chocolate milkshakes and French fries, talking about my day without the constant interruptions that characterized dinner at home. I can't believe it's still here, I said, sliding into our old favorite booth by the window. And it hasn't changed at all. Some things endure, Catherine said softly. We ordered coffee and pie, neither of us particularly hungry, but needing the normalcy of the ritual. The adrenaline of the confrontation was wearing off, leaving me shaky and uncertain. Do you think we did the right thing? I asked, stirring cream into my coffee. Making a scene at his retirement party. Catherine considered this. We didn't make the scene, Delia. Judith did the moment she decided to humiliate you publicly. We simply refused to accept that humiliation. My phone buzzed with notifications, texts from people who'd been at the party. William wrote that he was disturbed by the revelations and always thought there was something off about Judith's story. Martin expressed regret that the party had exposed such painful history, but assured me that my father's legacy at the company remained secure. Several others sent brief messages of support, nothing from Dad. The next morning, as I packed my suitcase in the hotel room, my phone finally displayed his name on the screen. I answered with a simple, "Hello, Delia," he said, his voice sounding older than it had just the day before. I don't know where to begin. The beginning might help, I suggested, sitting on the edge of the bed. He sighed heavily. I didn't know about the threats about Judith's brother intimidating Catherine. I swear, I didn't know that. But you knew something wasn't right, I pressed. You must have. The silence stretched between us. Yes, he finally admitted. When Catherine suddenly dropped the custody petition and moved away without saying goodbye to you. It didn't match the mother I'd known. but Judith had already been suggesting that Catherine was unstable, that her behavior had been erratic. I convinced myself it was better for you to have stability with us than to be caught in a conflict. You convinced yourself it was better for me, I repeated, while watching Judith systematically undermine my confidence. My relationship with you, my sense of belonging in your home. You saw it all and did nothing. I was a coward, he said simply. It was easier to look away, to focus on work, to tell myself that all step-family relationships are challenging. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of his admission. What does Judith say about all this? She's denying everything. Says Catherine is manipulating you, that the documents must be faked. He hesitated. She moved into the guest room last night. Says she won't be treated like a criminal in her own home. And what do you think, Dad? Another long pause. I think I've been living with blinders on for 20 years. I think I sacrificed my relationship with my daughter to keep the peace with my wife. I think I failed you in every way that matters. It was the most honest he'd been with me since I was a child. I can't fix this with one conversation, he continued. I know that, but I want to try to understand everything that happened, to make amends if that's even possible. I don't know if amends are possible, I said truthfully, but understanding might be a start. After we disconnected, I finished packing and checked out of the hotel. Catherine was waiting in the lobby, ready to drive me to the airport. Her presence beside me, this woman who shared my features, my mannerisms, my history, felt increasingly natural, as if the universe was gradually rebalancing after a long period of disorder. Back in Chicago, I threw myself into work, finding that I approached challenges with a new confidence. Something had fundamentally shifted inside me. Colleagues noticed the change. Sarah commented that I was taking up more space in meetings, offering opinions more freely, pushing back on ideas that didn't work, rather than trying to accommodate everyone. Whatever happened on that family trip, it agrees with you, she remarked after I successfully presented a risky campaign strategy that won us a major new client. The truth was, naming the injustice had freed me. No longer was I unconsciously trying to prove Judith wrong to show I wasn't a disappointment. I simply was who I was. Delia Morgan, competent, professional daughter of Catherine Person, worthy of respect and belonging. Catherine and I spoke several times weekly, building the relationship we'd been denied for 15 years. For Thanksgiving, instead of making the obligatory trip to Cedar Rapids, I flew to Minneapolis. We cooked together in her cozy apartment, laughing at our shared inability to properly carve a turkey, staying up late, sharing stories, and building new memories. Dad continued to reach out, tentative texts, occasional calls. I responded, but maintained firm boundaries. When he asked to visit Chicago to talk in person, I suggested meeting in a restaurant rather than my apartment. He accepted without complaint, seeming to understand that he would need to earn back my trust incrementally. Judith predictably oscillated between aggressive defensiveness and calculated silence. She sent a long email accusing me of destroying your father's happiness out of childish revenge, followed by weeks of no contact, then suddenly began forwarding me links to family therapy articles. When those were ignored, she tried reaching me through mutual connections, including my father's former secretary, who called under the pretense of just checking in. I learned through Dad that their marriage was struggling. We're seeing a counselor, he said during one of our brief phone conversations, separately and together. I don't know if we'll get through this, but I need to understand how I let things get so distorted. I wished him well but maintained my distance. His marriage was his to navigate. I had my own healing to focus on. 5 months after the retirement party, I received a job offer from a prestigious agency in Minneapolis. The position offered a significant promotion, creative control over major accounts, and the chance to build a new digital marketing division. It also offered proximity to Catherine. After careful consideration, I accepted. When I called Dad to tell him I'd be moving, he was quiet for a moment. That's Catherine's city, isn't it? Yes, I said simply. It's a good opportunity professionally, and its chance to rebuild what was taken from us. He cleared his throat. I understand. I hope you'll still be open to visits occasionally. I'd like to know the woman my daughter is becoming. I'd like that too, I said, surprised to find I meant it. Not right away, but eventually. As I packed up my Chicago apartment, I found the folder containing my prepared speech for the retirement party. Words never spoken, but carefully crafted to honor a father I'd never stopped loving despite everything. I read it once, acknowledging the hope and hurt it represented, then placed it in the shredder. Some chapters are better closed, so new ones can begin. 1 year after the retirement party confrontation, my life had transformed in ways I could never have predicted. Minneapolis had become home a city of lakes and parks where Catherine and I explored together, making up for lost time with weekend adventures and weekly dinner rituals. My new position at North Star Creative allowed me to build a team from scratch, implementing ideas I'd held back in my previous role. Under my leadership, the digital division had already secured 3 major national clients, and I'd been featured in Marketing Innovations magazine as an emerging industry leader. But the most profound changes were internal. Through weekly sessions with Dr. Abrams, a therapist specializing in family trauma, I was processing the complex grief of my disrupted childhood. I was learning to recognize how Judith's constant criticism had installed self-doubt as my default setting, how my father's passive acceptance had taught me that speaking up was futile, how the fabricated abandonment by my mother had left me with a deep fear of trusting others. Trauma responses made sense when you were surviving that environment. Dr. Abrams reminded me, the question now is what new responses would serve the life you're building. My relationship with Catherine deepened with each passing month. We discovered shared interests in photography and hiking. We had the same laugh, the same instinctive kindness towards strangers, the same inability to follow recipes without improvising. Being with her felt like finally finding the missing manual to understanding myself. My contact with Dad remained limited, but increasingly honest. He had moved out of the house he shared with Judith, taking an apartment downtown. Their counseling had revealed, he told me during a careful lunch meeting, incompatible versions of reality. I kept trying to understand how she could have done what she did, he explained, looking older but somehow more present than he'd been in years. She still insists she was protecting our marriage, that Catherine was the threat. She genuinely doesn't see her actions as wrong. And you? I asked. I see my failure more clearly every day, he said simply. Not just in believing Judith, but in choosing comfort over truth for decades, in watching her undermine you and doing nothing, in missing 15 years with Catherine that can never be recovered. He was seeing his own therapist, now confronting patterns established in his own family of origin, a distant father, a mother who prioritized appearances over authenticity. He was learning, as I was, that healing doesn't erase the past, but offers new ways to carry it. Judith had moved to Arizona to live near her sister after the divorce was finalized. She sent one final email before leaving, a masterpiece of deflection that positioned her as the victim of Catherine's vindictive campaign and my inability to appreciate all she had sacrificed. I didn't respond. Some bridges aren't meant to be rebuilt. Catherine and I established new family traditions. We hosted Thanksgiving dinner for a diverse collection of friends and colleagues, most of whom had their own complicated family situations. We took a photography course together, documenting our rediscovered city through matching vintage cameras. We planted a small garden on her apartment balcony, nurturing herbs and flowers with varying degrees of success. The professional confidence that had emerged after the confrontation continued to grow. I found myself mentoring younger team members, particularly women struggling with self-doubt. Your voice matters in this room. I would tell them words I wish someone had said to me years earlier. I shared parts of my story when it might help others. During a women's leadership panel, I spoke about recognizing gaslighting in family systems and how that awareness could prevent similar dynamics in workplace relationships. The response was overwhelming. Dozens of women approached me afterward, sharing their own experiences of having their reality denied or minimized. On the anniversary of the retirement party confrontation, Catherine and I took the day off work and drove to Lake Harriet. We rented a canoe and paddled to the center of the lake, the water glass smooth in the early morning light. "Do you ever regret it?" I asked as we floated beneath a cloudless sky. The confrontation, making public what could have remained private. Catherine considered this, her hands steady on the paddle. "I regret that it was necessary. I regret that Richard chose Judith's version of reality for so many years. I regret the childhood you deserved but didn't get. She met my eyes. But I don't regret standing beside you that night. I don't regret the truth finally being spoken. I nodded, understanding completely. There's a difference between revenge and reclamation. Exactly. She smiled. Revenge would have consumed us. Reclamation freed us. We paddled in comfortable silence for a while, watching birds skim the water surface. You know, Catherine said eventually, when you were about 6, you went through a phase where you asked me the same question every night at bedtime. You'd say, Mommy, am I enough? And I'd always answer, You're more than enough, you're extraordinary. Tears pricked my eyes at this recovered memory. I forgot that. After I was forced to leave, I used to imagine you still asking that question, but with no one to give you the right answer. Catherine's voice was steady, but her eyes shimmered. That was the hardest part, knowing Judith would have opportunities every day to shape how you saw yourself. She tried her best, I acknowledged, but something in me never fully believed her. Some core part of me held out for the truth. We returned to shore as the sun climbed higher, warming the day. After returning the canoe, we walked to a nearby cafe that had become one of our favorites, claiming a table by the window. To reclamation, Catherine said, raising her coffee mug in a small toast. To truth, I added, and to becoming her mother's daughter after all. The year since the confrontation had taught me that healing isn't a destination but a practice. Some days were harder than others. Some memories still carried sting. But increasingly, I defined myself not by what had been taken from me, but by what I was building now, a life of authenticity, meaningful work, and genuine connection. The words disappointment no longer held power over me. I had discovered a far more important truth, that when we stop seeking approval from those who are incapable of giving it, we create space for genuine joy to finally take root. Have you ever stood up to someone who tried to diminish you? Did you struggle with the aftermath of setting boundaries with family members? Share your story in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please subscribe and share it with someone who might need to hear that. They're not a disappointment either. Thank you for listening to my journey from shame to reclamation. Remember, your worth is never determined by those who fail to see it.